Rome hums at dusk. On the terrace, candles flicker, and the Colosseum breathes like a sleeping animal across the avenue. I reach the round table and stop. Where my place should be, there is air. No card, no plate, no chair. My husband lets out a light laugh, the kind that makes strangers think he is charming. He says there was a simple miscount. The family smiles as if the joke is harmless. I answer without raising my voice. It seems I am not family. I turn away, down the stairs, across the street. A tiny cafe with scratched marble tables and a barista who has seen everything. I order an espresso and open my phone. For 30 calm minutes, I unspool the evening. Venue, catering, cake, the private guide for the Vatican, tomorrow's vineyard lunch, the yacht, the villa in Tuscany. Cancelled, rerouted, reversed. When their glasses are half empty and the maitre d' asks for a different card, faces will bleach to winter white. They staged a graceful exit for me. I will give them an avalanche for themselves. My name is Anna. I plan events for people who believe nothing can touch them. Tonight, they learn to count again. The night smelled of white peonies, vanilla icing, and chilled champagne. Warm air moved across my shoulders like a polite apology delivered too late. I walked the arc of the table, knowing with the certainty of a blueprint that there should be 13 seats. I had signed off on that chart. I had checked every name twice. Yet between my husband and his mother, there was a neat absence. No linen, no silver, no sign that I existed. I told myself to breathe, slow and even. I have coached brides through blizzards and blackouts. I have rebuilt timelines after governors changed their plans at the last minute. But humiliation is weather of a different kind. It bites from the inside, clean and cold. Looks like someone miscounted, I said, in the steady tone I reserve for emergencies. Eyes slid toward me, then away. Brows lifted in soft pantomime. A cousin let out a social giggle. My husband's laugh followed, effortless and airy, as if this were a magic trick and he was the clever assistant. I read the room. I saw the choreography. Concern would come next, perfumed and useless. I could have asked for a chair. I could have forced a scene, called for the manager, produced the signed plan with 13 names. That was their trap. They had built a story in which I was fragile and dramatic, a woman who could not bear the pressure of their elegant world. If I shouted, I would be proving their thesis. So I did something simpler. I straightened my back. I lifted my chin. It seems I am not family, I said, soft enough that anyone who wanted to look away could pretend they had not heard. Then I turned and walked. The elevator doors closed with a considerate sigh. In the mirrored panel, I saw a woman in midnight silk, posture precise, eyes clear. My chest felt hollow and bright, like a room after the guests leave and before the staff arrives. I stepped onto the street. The cafe across the way had 2 empty tables and a view of the terrace. Steam curled from the espresso machine. The server placed a tiny cup in front of me and asked if I needed anything else. I did. I needed 30 quiet minutes. Event work is systems and grace. You solve a crisis while making it look like theater. I opened my phone and entered a familiar battlefield. Email threads, vendor portals, service dashboards. My fingers were steady. My voice when I called the maitre d' was velvet over steel. We confirmed identities. We confirmed that I, not the family, had placed the deposits. We confirmed the clause that allowed a full reversal under specific conditions. Conditions I had anticipated the moment I saw the blank space at the table. Venue security protocols require decorum, he said. Of course, I replied. This will be discreet. I drafted a simple note. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the contracting party requests immediate cancellation and reversal of guarantees. The message traveled with attachments, letters of authorization, copies of transfers, a timeline. Policy is a language. I am fluent. By the time the espresso cup was empty, the first thread was closed, then the second, then the third. 20 minutes. Then 25. At minute 29, I looked up. On the terrace, they lifted their glasses. Elegance can be a mask for cruelty. Cruelty has a way of smearing the paint. I paid in cash and crossed the street. Inside the service corridor, the light was cooler. the air quieter. The manager met me by the kitchen door. He had the careful face of a man who has navigated more than a few social storms. We spoke briefly. He would inform them in 5 minutes. I would be nearby, invisible, present. 5 minutes is a lifetime when a facade begins to crack. It was enough. Before Rome, before the chair that wasn't, there was Boston, and a woman who learned to make order out of other people's chaos. I started with borrowed stemware, a folding table, and a list of names no one would return my calls from. I worked the way stonemasons work, line by line, edge by edge. Venue managers learned I paid on time. Florists learned I could count backward from disaster and land on flawless. Chefs learned my timelines respected the heat of the kitchen. In that city, people talk. Word traveled. By the time I met Sean Caldwell, I could turn an empty ballroom into a whisper. He found me at a benefit where the ceiling wore garden lights and the string quartet sounded like rain. He had the ease of someone who had never waited for access. Dark hair arranged just so. A smile engineered to reassure. Many men of privilege perform charm the way actors perform kindness. He was different, or I wanted him to be. "You're the mind behind all this," he said, as if he had discovered me. "My mother needs a planner for her charity night. I think we just found her." 1 invitation became 3. 3 became a calendar's worth of weekends. The Caldwells were the kind of old money that never whistles for the check. Their world ran on velvet ropes and first-name welcomes. If you looked closely, you could see the rules stamped into the grain of their lives, old as ship manifests and railway deeds. Then came the attention that looks like approval until you read the fine print. His mother, Eleanor, had a way of smiling that never reached the eyes. Compliments with soft barbs. Questions about my background, as if competence needed pedigree. In their circles, respect often travels in the same car as condescension. It just sits in the back seat. Love stories are simple until they meet a family system. I told myself Sean was different from his bloodline. He laughed at himself. He asked about my work. He tasted street food without a flinch. He proposed on a quiet night when the river smelled like rain, and I said yes, because every fortress has a door you only see from the inside. Marriage to the Caldwells was a long hallway of polished floors and quiet corrections. At gatherings, my ideas were invited and then set politely on the floor. My company was hired and then second-guessed, as if my talent were a hobby they indulged for color. "Anna has such a good eye," Eleanor would say, patting my hand the way one pats a dog that has done a trick. Almost like having a personal planner in the family. Almost. That word can cut glass. I learned to hold my face like a mirror and give nothing back. I learned their taxonomy of small slights. The wrong place card, the seat near the draft, the late-breaking change delivered as a favor. I also learned their financial habits because invoices tell the truth people refuse to speak. Delayed wires, accounts that needed a few more days. Conversations that tightened when I entered the room. A week in Rome for Eleanor's milestone birthday should have been a jewel in my portfolio. Sunrise tours, sunset terraces, a dinner with a view of history's bones. I built the schedule with the care of a watchmaker. I leveraged every favor earned over years of showing up prepared. If I saw warning lights, vendors calling about lags, a bookkeeper's strained voice, I tucked them into a mental drawer. Fix the event first, I told myself. Ask hard questions later. Then, the morning of our flight, a text flashed on my husband's screen while he showered. I do not make a habit of reading other people's messages. That morning, I did. Perhaps some part of me was done with pretending. "Can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet?" The name at the top of the thread was Vanessa Hughes. Old love. Favorite of the family. A tidy path not taken. The exchange went back months. Plans, future tense verbs, a child on the way. I moved as if under cool water. Screenshots, forward to a private address. Delete from his phone. Smile for the car. Kiss at the gate. Sleek luggage sliding over polished floors. The entire machine hummed along. On the plane, I stared at clouds that looked like unfolded linen and made a decision with the kind of clarity that arrives after too much noise. I would not confront him. In the air, or on the first night, or in the shade of some fountain where tourists throw coins and make small wishes. I would wait. I would observe. I would finish the event to my standards, and when the stage was set for my exit, I would write a different final line. The city greeted us with gold. Streets shone as if someone had brushed them with olive oil. I had arranged black sedans for the entire party. They glided to a stop in neat formation. Eleanor stepped out, looked at the vehicles, and frowned like a queen finding a crease in her hem. "I thought we requested the hotel cars," she said. Information delivered, not a question. I gave a calm, accurate answer. She had moved on before I finished speaking. At the hotel, staff executed the welcome I had scripted. Cold bottles, fresh flowers, itineraries sealed in vellum. I had selected suites for views and light and a sense of arrival. Eleanor placed her folder on a side table as if it might stain her day. "We will play it by ear," she said, the sentence that ruins 100 perfect plans. The pattern sharpened. Breakfasts that happened without me, whispered conferences that ended when I walked up. Family shopping, they said of an outing that replaced the private Vatican morning I had secured months in advance. I am familiar with the way groups decide who belongs. You miss one message, then another. Soon the stream of information flows around you like water around a rock. On the third day, the door to Sean's briefcase did not click shut. I did not touch anything. I only looked. Draft papers. A settlement designed to seem generous to anyone who did not know the scale of what was missing. A script, printed, with beats and pauses like a play, describing how our separation would be announced at Eleanor's dinner, so that society would understand we had made the choice together. My name was a prop. My future, a line break. I took photographs. I sent the images to the same quiet inbox. My hands shook afterward, not with fear, but with the body's pure chemical refusal to be lied to again. That afternoon, logistics called me back to ground. A final check with the restaurant, a tasting menu confirmed. Place cards done by a calligrapher whose ink strokes make people want to keep their napkins. A small mountain of white peonies and pale roses, because Eleanor claimed color was vulgar at night. Champagne on ice, cake flawless, tears exact, edges so clean they looked unreal. In the hotel business center, printers hummed while I reviewed confirmations. Voices carried from the concierge desk. Eleanor's is hard to miss, round and decisive. "There will be 12 seats, not 13, she told someone on the phone. "The seating chart is final. Yes, my son is aware. His wife will not be staying for dinner. It is a family matter." Paper slid from the machine. Something slid into place inside me. The missing chair was not an accident, or a last-minute rub of incompetence they could blame on a faceless staffer. It was the keystone of their story. I closed the folder and walked to the elevator. My pulse slowed with every floor. Plans are scaffolding. A life can hang from them or jump from them. In the quiet of our suite, I opened a different set of files, contracts under my signature, payment records stamped with my company's name, clauses that would let me take back what I had put down if specific conditions were met. I do not believe revenge is a strategy. I believe in documentation. Evening came dressed in velvet. I zipped myself into midnight blue and painted on a calm that matched the dress. In the lobby, the family waited as a tableau, diamonds and shining shoes, a cluster of practiced smiles. The elevator ride up felt like a countdown measured in heartbeats. The terrace was a stage set. Rome provided the backdrop, arches lit like a crown, sky deep as ink. Guests murmured in admiration, a sound I have built for so many others. I walked toward the table that should have held 13 futures and met the cool gap where mine had been erased. The line I chose was simple. "It seems I am not family." The words left my mouth like a key finding the right lock. Faces shifted. The laugh in my husband's throat died unspoken. I saw the surprise of a script derailed, the nervous movement of hands toward water glasses, the tilt of heads that says, "We did not plan this line." I will see myself out, I added, because dignity is sometimes nothing more than sentence choice. I left. I crossed the street. I set a clock in my head for 30 minutes. A machine began to move. The first call was to the maitre d'. He knew my voice. He knew my record. He knew the value of a relationship that might outlast the headline of a single night's embarrassment. We confirmed the question that matters in hospitality. Who, precisely, is responsible? I was. Therefore, I could unmake what I had made. Next came the vineyard, the guide, the boat, the villa. I offered sincere apologies, then the necessary documents. Deposits returned to the account that had funded them, my company's line, not the family's. With each confirmation I felt lighter, as if heavy jewelry had been removed after a long day. My phone filled with messages, first curious, then annoyed, then urgent. I did not answer. At minute 29, I stood, smoothed my skirt, and returned to the service entrance. The manager met me by the door. "Are you sure?" he asked, the code phrase for "this will be unforgettable." "I am sure," I said. He nodded and walked into the light. From the shadowed alcove, I watched him lean toward the patriarch, watched expressions tilt from contentment to confusion to something sharper. The story had begun to write itself in public. Rome has seen empires fall. Tonight, it would witness a dinner come undone. From the alcove near the kitchen door, I watched the manager approach the head of the table. He bent slightly, spoke in a careful voice, and presented a tablet for review. Polite confusion creased the patriarch's forehead. He gave the look of a man who has never heard the word declined spoken to him in public. Across from him, Eleanor set down her fork. The diamonds at her throat caught the candlelight like tiny suns. She lifted her chin and performed composure for the room. She had trained for this moment her entire life. Composure, then pressure, then someone else's problem to solve. That was the family method. My phone began to buzz. First one message, then another, then a cascade. I did not pick up. The screen filled with my husband's name over and over. Texts moved through the stages of denial like stations on a train line. First, "Where are you?" Then, "Stop being childish." Then, "Mother is upset." Then, "You are embarrassing us." It is odd how abusers choose plural pronouns. It gives them a chorus for their scolding. The manager's voice carried just enough to reach the nearest tables. He spoke of authorizations and guarantees. He spoke of payment sources and contracting parties. He spoke in the cool language of policy. Policy is a shield when people want a favor that breaks the world. The cousins lowered their voices to a hiss. The brother stared at his phone and scrolled with fast, jerky motions. The sister leaned toward her husband, lips barely moving, like a ventriloquist working a frightened puppet. A server arrived with caviar, paused, realized the timing had turned, and glided away with perfect training. My husband stood too quickly. His chair scraped back and almost toppled. He walked toward the railing and called me. This time I answered. I wanted him to hear calm. "It seems I am not family," I said again, as if reading a weather report. "What are you doing?" His voice was tight and sharp. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "Yes, I have an exact idea," I said. "It was the point of your plan. You wrote a script for my humiliation and called it a family matter. I wrote a different scene." He shifted tactics. People like him always do. "We can fix this," he said. "Come back to the hotel. We will talk there. 20 minutes. I will meet you in the lobby." "No," I said. "One syllable can be the whole of a life. There will be no lobby. There will be no private talk. There will be no narrative in which I am hysterical and you are reasonable. There will be contracts. There will be law. Silence crept in. I could hear forks touch china. I could hear the soft thud of a bottle set on linen. In that hush, his tone changed from command to plea. Please, Anna, you do not understand what this will do to us. I do, I said, and I know what you planned to do to me. I ended the call and stepped out of shadow. I walked to the edge of the terrace where the string lights drew a firm horizon between sky and story. I let them see me. The manager glanced my way. I inclined my head. He continued with his work. He asked for an alternative method of payment. The patriarch opened his wallet and produced a card with the airy confidence of a man who expects all doors to be held open. The manager shook his head with professional sorrow. Words passed between them that do not belong to romance. Wire, hold, release, reversal. Those words have gravity. They make people choose. Eleanor touched her necklace, not for beauty, but for comfort. The sister bit the inside of her cheek. The brother's wife looked ashamed, which told me she still had a working moral compass, even if it did not point true north tonight. I waited until my husband looked up and found me with his eyes. I lifted my glass of water to him in a small toast. He paled. He has always understood gestures better than words. I left the terrace as the first course cooled. In a city of ruins and arches, I moved through stone that has endured more than one family scandal. Down the stairs, through the service hall, out to the street, where traffic hummed and a scooter trilled by. My 30 minutes were done. Gravity had done the work. Back in the cafe, I wrote one last message. It was not to him. It was to the manager. I thanked him for his professionalism. I wished his staff a quiet night. I asked that any gossip about the evening placed the blame where it belonged, on the contracting party, who failed to honor their obligations. In events, stories always travel. I prefer mine to travel with footnotes. I returned to the hotel by a different street. I wanted the air, and I wanted the time to let my heartbeat settle into a new rhythm. In the lobby, a piano player stitched together a medley of standards. The melody said everything is normal. The faces said otherwise. Staff learn the shape of trouble fast. At the elevator, I met my reflection again. Midnight silk, calm mouth, clear eyes. My bones felt lighter than they had in years. Not floaty, not numb. Light. The way a body feels when it finally puts down boxes it should never have been asked to carry. Upstairs, I began to pack. I have always believed in packing as ceremony. You place a life into a series of small decisions. You say, this stays and this goes. You say, this was a gift with strings and this was a thing I chose. You teach your hands to let go so your heart can follow. I folded dresses and blouses, the pieces that make a woman legible in rooms that grade you by fabric. I set aside jewelry I had bought for myself in early years when each bracelet meant a new client, a new tier, a new month in the black. I left anything that had arrived with a Caldwell name attached, wedding crystal, monogrammed linens, a watch given as a performance of love and an instrument of control. Let that history live in their drawers. I photographed documents again. I labeled files with names an attorney would appreciate. I moved copies to an encrypted vault. I left paper crumbs for the truth to follow if anyone tried to sweep. At dawn, Rome turned the color of peach flesh. I took a cab to the airport alone. No grand exit. No final scene. Quiet is the one luxury I will always choose. At the gate, I changed a seat to first class, using miles I had earned shepherding other people's holidays. Redemption is a word for airlines. It is also a word for souls. The flight was a soft capsule of time. No decisions, no voices insisting I was too sensitive or too ambitious or too much. Clouds, then sea, then clouds again. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I wrote a list titled After. It had 3 lines. Call lawyer, secure accounts, move home. The phone lit up after landing. Messages waited like a choir that had been holding a note for too long. I scrolled without opening. Names, exclamation marks, a threat framed as advice, a plea framed as apology. It is remarkable how the tone of a message reveals a person's true religion. Between flights in London, I sat with a pot of tea and read everything in order. The father's text used the word actionable. The sister's text used the word ruined. The brother's text used no verbs at all, only pure rage, like a man throwing rocks at an empty house. Eleanor's note was an aria of disdain, each sentence polished to a hateful shine. Then came my husband, again and again, moving through a crisis script. You do not know what you have done. You have harmed people who did not deserve it. Donors are asking questions. The hotel wants the week prepaid. The paper might be calling. And then a sentence with a weight that would have flattened me a year earlier and landed now with only factual chill. My father had a small heart episode. Is that what you wanted? People like this confuse consequence with cruelty. They forget they built the mechanism. They forget you warned them. I replied to no one. I forwarded key files to my attorney and wrote 3 sentences with clean verbs. Hold these. Expect contact. We will not initiate. When I landed in Boston, the city smelled like wet brick and salt. I took a cab to the place that had been our house and walked through rooms that held more silence than I remembered. I called a moving crew for the next morning. I took a suitcase and a box of first editions. I left the rest because I did not need a jury to know what belongs to me. The night was clear. I slept in a small apartment I had rented years earlier and kept as an office, a plan B that had whispered to me in the language of prudence. The bed was narrow but honest. The morning brought coffee and a visit to my bank and a meeting with my lawyer, a woman who reads bad behavior like a weather map and packs an umbrella made of case law. We moved through the checklist. We discussed disclosures I could make if forced. We discussed disclosures I would not make because truth can be wielded without becoming the thing you fight. She nodded when I finished and said 3 words I needed to hear. You did well. News travels in that city the way tide moves in a harbor, slowly, then all at once. In the society pages, a small item noted an inquiry into an investment group managed by a well-known family. The item did not name the family. It did not need to. In the right circles, everyone can read with their eyes closed. I went to work. Clients called, steady and calm. A hotel sales director sent a note that began with a discreet compliment and ended with a contract. A florist wrote, "Proud of you," then apologized for being personal, then asked for dates for the summer. People who serve the public learn to recognize a line crossed from power into harm. They remember who kept decorum and who threw plates. The knock at my apartment door came 1 week later. My husband looked less tall. Privilege shrinks a person when it hits air. He spoke first, because he always speaks first. You need to come home, he said, as if home were a spell he could cast. This has gone far enough. It is not a tactic, I said. It is a boundary. He floated the new argument, the one addicts to status always reach for. If I fall, you fall, because marriage is a rope that ties our ankles. My debts are your debts, he said. If the ship sinks, you go down with it. Not when you hid facts in bad faith, I said. Not when you staged a public exit to damage my position. Not when I can prove it. My lawyer had chosen better words, longer ones, precise as chisels. But he needed the simple sentence more than the statute. He sat down without asking, which felt correct. He put his head in his hands. He told me he still loved me in a tone that suggested love was a vote, and I could be counted back in with enough persuasion. He offered a non-disclosure agreement. He asked for the files back. He said, "Name your price." There it was. The same mistake, refined. He did not understand me. He never had. "I want my freedom," I said, "and my name intact. Those are not for sale." He told me there was a child on the way. I said I knew. He asked how. I said I had read the thread. His face went slack for a second, the way faces do when the story in their head detaches from the world. We said nothing for a while. Rain began to tick the window. I thought of Rome, of arches and light and an empty chair that had shown me the map out. I told him the terms. What is mine leaves with me. What is his stays with him. He nodded because there was nothing else left to do. When he rose to go, he looked at the small room as if cataloging it for a ledger. "You will regret this," he said without heat. "No," I said. "I already did the regretting. I am done." The door clicked shut. The room breathed. I poured myself water and stood a long time just breathing back. Fallout is quieter than people think. There is no drum roll. There is no chorus. There is the sound of brooms in a ballroom the morning after. There are emails that begin with "following up" and carry heat under the words. There are invitations that evaporate without comment. There are people who make a point of walking across the room to shake your hand. The larger paper ran a longer piece weeks later. It used phrases like irregularities and investor concerns. It noted resignations. It quoted a spokesperson who praised the family's legacy with an eloquence that only happens when a ship lists in full view of the harbor. Donors pulled out of Eleanor's causes. Not all. Enough. Board titles shifted from active to honorary, which is society's way of smiling while it closes the door. The family whispered about weather. They called it a storm, as if the clouds had chosen them by accident. Weather does not file scripts for dinner. Vanessa appeared in photographs with a ring and a glow that said a child was more fact than future. Timelines will tell the truth for you if you leave them alone long enough. I sent no card. I sent no comment. I wished that child a better inheritance than a dynasty of pretending. Work filled my days the way light fills rooms that face east. A film director hired me for a coastal wedding where the sea kept time for the band. A museum asked for a gala that would let guests drift through wings like sleepwalkers in a good dream. I negotiated without apology. I paid vendors early. I tipped like a person who remembers. In the quiet hours, I took inventory of myself. I had learned 3 lessons I planned to keep. First, a mirror without permission is a trap. Do not let people project their weakness onto your surface. Second, documentation is a form of mercy. It saves you from arguing with stories that never meant to include you. Third, dignity is a daily choice, not a medal you get at the end. On the anniversary of Rome, I returned to Italy for work, a wedding on a cliff, blue water loud as a choir. The couple laughed the way people laugh when they know they are on the same side. I stood on a terrace with a tablet in my hand and a team on headsets, and felt something I had not felt in years. Ease. At sunset, I lifted a glass of mineral water and toasted the empty chair that had given me a map. Not for the pain it held, but for the clarity it offered. Some absences are gifts. They show you where not to sit ever again. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from the restaurant manager in Rome. He had heard, through the network that keeps hospitality alive, that the family had settled their obligations that same week by placing a piece of jewelry as collateral until a wire arrived. His note was simple, almost tender. He thanked me again for professionalism, for discretion, for not making his staff the story. I wrote back 2 lines of gratitude and closed that chapter with a click. I slept with the balcony door open. The sea carried its old lullaby into the room. I thought of Boston brick and London rain and Roman stone. I thought of the girl who started with borrowed stemware and the woman who now chooses her clients as carefully as she chooses her words. I thought of the future with no scripts other people wrote for my exit. Morning brought a soft breeze and a fresh list. Setup, rehearsal, lighting, sound, seating. The work is always there. So is the joy when you build for love instead of illusion. My assistant asked if I needed anything else. I told her yes. I asked for 3 chairs to be placed at the back of the ceremony space. She raised a brow. I smiled. They are for anyone who arrives feeling like they do not have a place, I said. We will always make a place. She nodded. We always do. The music swelled. The couple took their vows. Guests wiped happy tears and told each other this was the best night. I slipped into the rhythm that has saved me 1,000 times. Anticipate, adjust, breathe, repeat. When the cake arrived, its edges were so clean they looked unreal. We set it down like a promise kept. Near midnight, I stood alone for a moment under cafe lights and let quiet gather. There was no triumph in me, no vindictive burn, only a bright, ordinary peace. I had built my life back into my own hands. That was enough. The email arrived on a gray morning that smelled like rain and printer ink. Subject line: Inquiry for a signature event. No family name, no logo. A private account with a polite alias asked for a meeting to discuss a gala in late spring. The tone was careful, the way a person walks across a floor that might creak. We met in a hotel lounge with velvet chairs and the kind of tea service that makes you sit straighter. The woman who approached me introduced herself as an advisor. She carried a leather folder and an apology in her eyes. I act for a long-standing charitable foundation, she said. They would value your leadership on an upcoming event. We spoke in general terms: guest flow, program pacing, donor experience. I listened and watched the way her hands tightened at the knuckles when I asked about board approval. At last she placed a card on the table. It held no emblem, only a name I knew too well. Eleanor Caldwell, written as neatly as a signature on a check. There was a time when seeing that name would have turned my stomach to glass. Now it registered as data. I poured more tea and waited for the rest. The foundation has had a challenging season, the advisor said. They hope a successful gala might reset the narrative. They should hire a publicist, I said gently. A planner cannot mend a story that is still breaking. They hoped you might consider, she said. The family acknowledges tensions in the past. I thought of white peonies and a missing chair. I thought of a script printed on thick paper with my life reduced to stage directions. I thought of a staff that had done nothing wrong and vendors who had not been paid on time. I appreciate the inquiry, I said, and I respect the foundation's mission. My calendar is full. The advisor nodded, relief and regret braided together. I thought that would be your answer, she said. May I tell them anything else? Yes, I said. Tell them this. Generosity starts with accountability. When they practice it, doors will open that have nothing to do with ballrooms. She closed her folder. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. On the sidewalk, a child hopped across chalk squares someone had drawn on wet concrete, a hopscotch of colors, a map to somewhere better. I stood for a moment under the awning and let the cool air find my face. Back at my office, my assistant asked how it went. I told her we had declined. She nodded as if a small equilibrium had been restored. Then we returned to the real work. A seating plan that would let old rivals sit close enough to be seen and far enough to breathe. That night I cooked for myself. Pasta, plain and honest. Olive oil, garlic, a squeeze of lemon. Music low, windows open to the city's small sounds. You can rebuild a life with such simple tools. A pan, a playlist, a promise to yourself that peace will not be the last thing on your list. The next morning brought a short note from the advisor. She thanked me for my time. She wrote one line that was not strictly professional. I hope one day they understand, she said. I replied with one word. Likewise. Sometimes the only audience that matters is the one inside your own ribs. I slept well. When lawyers speak, the air changes. It becomes drier, clearer. Words are weighed. Silences are recorded. There is comfort in it, if you like rules. The first deposition took place in a conference room with a patient clock and pitchers of water that sweated onto coasters. My attorney sat to my left, spine long, hands still. Across from us, the family's counsel arranged papers in neat stacks and gave me a courteous nod. He was the type who believes charm can sand down a fact. I am the type who believes a document is a document. We swore the oath. We began. He asked about Rome. I answered with verbs and dates. He asked about authorizations. I produced letters and contracts with my name printed clearly, signatures crisp, clauses highlighted. He suggested my cancellations were vindictive. My attorney raised an eyebrow 0.5 millimeter, which in legal language means, do not embarrass yourself. I explained policy. I explained guarantees and reversals. I explained the principle that the responsible party is the one who signs and pays. He asked about messages. I supplied what I was obligated to supply and nothing more. Screenshots of a script for a public exit. Drafts of separation terms designed to make me accept less than I was due. Notes that used words like optics and timing. Words that turn a marriage into a campaign. He did not ask about love. Law does not have a line item for that. When we broke for lunch, my attorney and I ate sandwiches that tasted like paper and victory. She said I had been composed. I said composure is a habit. She said it is also a weapon. I poured more water and let my shoulders fall the smallest degree. In the afternoon, the questions turned to money. Offshore accounts. Transfers clustered around anniversaries and holidays, like gifts with a different kind of ribbon. I kept my voice steady and let the copies speak. A spreadsheet is the opposite of a rumor. It has no interest in your dignity. It is either correct or it is not. He tried one more angle. Do you regret the public nature of what happened at dinner? He asked, and the tone suggested a kindness that was not his to suggest. I thought of the waitstaff and the manager who had handled a disaster they did not create. I thought of my own choice not to make a scene, but to make a call. I regret that their plan required a public stage, I said. I regret that they chose humiliation as a tool. I do not regret using policies as written. He nodded and made a note that likely read as something like, "Witness carries herself well." My attorney did not smile, but the air near her mouth brightened. By the next week, settlements had new shapes. Numbers marched in columns. Clauses lost their barbs. The rope he had tried to tie to my ankles loosened. I held firm on the one term that mattered to me. No non-disclosure. I will not trade my voice for a check. They pushed, briefly. They hinted about reputations and futures, and how nice it feels to put the past into a drawer. I reminded them that silence is not a virtue when it shields a pattern. We signed. We filed. We walked out into the ordinary light, with the day still waiting to be used. After, I took the train to the ocean and sat on a bench that felt as if it remembered every person who had waited there for a better tide. A gull considered me as if I might have brought snacks. I had not. I had brought only myself, which finally felt like enough. That evening, my attorney texted one sentence. "Proud of you." I wrote back too. Likewise. See you next time for happier work. The next time came sooner than either of us expected. A museum asked me to serve on a committee that allocated grants to small arts groups, the kind that turn light into music and paint into hope. I said yes without hesitation. You cannot just close doors. You also have to open them. We met once a month in a room full of sketches and stories. We gave funds to a dance collective that performed in laundromats and libraries. We gave funds to a teen theater that staged plays in school cafeterias. We gave funds to a choir that sang lullabies in multiple languages for newborns and new citizens. Not one of those nights required a script for anyone's exit. The work steadied me. It reminded me that not all structures are weaponized. Some are scaffolds built to lift. I had not planned to see Vanessa. Life, with its small timing tricks, had other ideas. We were in the same cafe by accident. I was picking up coffee for my team before a site visit. She was at a corner table with a stroller and a tote that said something cheerful about motherhood. She looked tired, in the way new parents look when the night has been a long conversation with a small person who speaks in hunger and weather. She saw me. Her eyes widened, then softened. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her. I considered leaving. I considered staying. I sat. She introduced the baby in a whisper, as if the name might float away if spoken too loudly. The child slept, hands curled into fists the size of plums. Beauty has a way of making you gentler in a second. Thank you for sitting, she said. I wanted to say something that does not fit in a message. I waited. I am sorry, she said simply, for my part in the harm, for the way secrecy deforms everything around it, for not seeing the whole until it broke. I believed her, not because of the words, because of the posture, because of the way her voice had no angle to it, because of the baby sleeping through our complicated history. I do not need an apology to move on, I said, but I accept it. She nodded. He says the story differently, she added with a small, flat smile. Of course he does. Of course he does, I said. We sat in the quiet that follows truth. Outside, a bus sighed to a stop and let off passengers with library books and grocery bags. Life kept happening, unbothered by our small tragedy. He told me about your condition, she said carefully. Your one rule in the settlement. No silence, I said. I wanted the right to speak about what is mine. And will you? She asked. Only if necessary, I said. I prefer to let my work be the loud thing. She looked down at the child. I hope she grows up to know that sentence, she whispered, to make her work the loud thing. We talked for a little while about sleep schedules and the price of diapers, and the strange math of a day that holds both delight and despair. She did not ask for friendship. I did not offer it. What we created was smaller and steadier, a truce that had room for a baby's breath and a woman's boundary. When I stood to leave, she reached into the tote and pulled out a small envelope. This is a receipt, she said, for a donation in your honor to a shelter that serves women leaving controlling relationships. It is not a gesture to buy forgiveness. It is a note to the universe saying, I learned something. I took the envelope. My throat went tight. Thank you, I said, and meant the larger thing. On the sidewalk, the air had turned bright and cold. I walked toward the venue where my team was waiting with clipboards and calm. On a corner, a busker played a song on a violin that sounded like a road unrolling. I stopped and listened for 3 minutes. Then I kept going. At the site, we mapped a ceremony into a space that had once been a factory. The light poured through tall windows like conviction. I asked for 3 extra chairs at the back. My assistant gave me the look that says, she knows the story by heart now. Always, she said, and wrote it down. We ran the rehearsal until the couple felt their nerves loosen. We trained ushers to spot someone alone and offer a path. We tested microphones and told the DJ to keep the highs soft and the mids warm so elders could hear vows without flinching. Love lives in details. So does recovery. After the walkthrough, I stood in the empty hall and imagined the room filled. Friends, family, strangers turned kind by the simple fact of witnessing. I imagined joy moving like a tide that leaves people more themselves than before. I imagined a woman at the back who has not been counted recently, and a chair waiting where she can sit and breathe. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I let it ring out and go to voicemail. At my desk, I listened. It was Eleanor. Her voice was flatter than I remembered, stripped of lacquer. She did not apologize. Of course she did not. She did not ask for help. Of course she did not. She said one sentence I had not expected to hear. I underestimated you, she said. Then she hung up. I sat for a long time without moving. Some acknowledgments do not mend anything. They merely mark the truth. Even so, a mark is better than a myth. I opened my laptop and returned to the run of show for next week. Add 2 minutes for the walk of grandparents. Remind the photographer that candid faces matter more than posed stares. Ask the caterer to plate one vegan entree at each table unannounced, so no one has to raise a hand and declare their difference. Work, and the way it can be kindness, carried me through the afternoon. At sunset, I walked to the river and watched the light pour itself into water. My reflection looked back, anchored and awake. Somewhere in another part of the city, a child slept, and a woman learned new boundaries. And an empire of pretending continued to crack in quiet rooms. I went home. I cooked. I played music. I slept. Morning would ask for steady hands again. I was ready. A good event is a building made of moments. You do not notice the beams when the light is right. You only feel held. That winter, I redesigned my intake process. The form asked better questions. Not just budget and headcount, but values. What story are you trying to tell without saying it aloud? What will still matter the morning after? Which guest must feel seen? Which guest must be gently managed? People told the truth when you asked with care. I added a clause to my contracts that had lived unspoken in me for years. It said, I serve gatherings that honor dignity. It said, I retain the right to walk away if a client uses spectacle to humiliate. My lawyer approved the language with a small smile. This is a spine, she said. Paper needs spines. Vendors noticed. Word traveled in the network that keeps the world of hospitality breathing. Managers told managers that my teams tipped properly and kept schedules shaped to respect heat, sound, and feet. Chefs told chefs that I protected plating windows with the dedication of a surgeon. Florists told florists that I knew when to cut a centerpiece by an inch so guests could see each other's eyes. I slept easier. Boundaries let sleep find you. On a snow-clear morning, a new client came in carrying a folder stuffed with printouts and hope. She was planning a memorial for a grandmother who had run a neighborhood kitchen out of her own stove. Not a saint, the client said. A woman who burnt the rice sometimes and told you to sit down anyway. We designed a service where each guest took home a recipe card with smudges printed in the ink, a reminder that love is messy and still perfect. I cried in my car after that one, not from grief but from recognition. This was the work I had meant to do all along, build rooms where truth could breathe. I said no more often. No to a hedge fund party that wanted to treat staff like moving props. No to a socialite who wanted a surprise proposal that would corner someone into a yes. No to a company that planned to turn layoffs into a theater piece about resilience. The refusals tasted clean. Yes came easily to the rest. To a shelter's fundraiser that would move women into safe apartments with doors that locked and stayed locked. To a library gala that would finance weekend hours so teenagers could do homework in peace. To a wedding between two 60-year-olds who had finally found each other and wanted a small ceremony at a lakeside with thermoses of cocoa and a brass trio that knew when to be quiet. Trust is built in inches. You cannot buy it. You show up, you do the work, you leave a place better than you found it. I watched my team move like a conversation they had rehearsed without words. I watched my clients exhale when the lights came up just so. I watched myself from a small distance and thought, you are the person you needed when you were younger. On a night swept with sleet, I found a letter slid under my office door. Thick paper, careful script. No signature at the bottom, only a line. Someone is finally saying it out loud. A clipping was tucked inside from a business journal. It detailed in the measured tone of financial reporting a series of decisions that had led a certain investment group to the edge. The piece did not mention dinner in Rome. It did not need to. It mentioned patterns. That was enough. I put the clipping in a folder labeled Keep for Later and turned off the lights. Outside, sidewalks shone like glass. I walked home slowly, grateful for boots that gripped and a spine that held. Spring turned the city tender. Trees exploded into the kind of green that makes you forgive everything winter said. We mounted a museum gala that moved guests through time. Work tables where artisans demonstrated crafts, silent stages where dancers stretched the idea of balance, galleries where docents whispered the stories paintings keep when visitors lean close. I stationed myself near the entrance to the Great Hall as the program shifted to speeches. The board chair spoke like a man who knows words can open wallets. The director spoke like a woman who knows art is oxygen. I watched faces soften in the way donors' faces do when generosity becomes relief instead of performance. Halfway through, I felt the faintest tug in the air, like a current changing direction. I looked up. Eleanor had entered with 2 companions, and the posture of a person who refuses to be excluded even by history. She was thinner, her armor dulled by months that had not offered her the mirror she preferred. Our eyes met across a distance filled with light and orchids and the hum of 1,000 small conversations. She did not approach me. I did not approach her. That was our truce. She took a seat near the aisle, close enough to be seen, not so close that anyone would ask her to work. After the speeches, while guests moved to the next gallery, a woman in her 70s stopped in front of me. She wore a jacket the color of dusk and a brooch shaped like a sprig of rosemary. "I have chaired more committees than I can count," she said without preamble. "I have watched rooms either wound or mend. Tonight, mends." "Thank you," I said. "Compliments are a kind of currency, but some you keep in a different drawer." She leaned in just enough to be tender and said, "I am sorry for what you endured," then drifted away before I could formulate a response. The remark landed like a benediction from a stranger who knew the true story without needing the gossip. I took a walk through the side corridor to steady myself. A guard nodded at me with the quiet respect of a person who has watched the world's better and worse, and still chooses gentle. In a small side gallery I found a painting of a woman at a window, her hands folded on the sill. The plaque said the artist painted it after leaving a marriage. The light on the woman's face was not triumphant. It was clear. Back in the Great Hall, the band eased into a rhythm that made older guests sway and younger guests grin. I watched Eleanor rise and leave before dessert. She paused near the door as if she might look back. She did not. Choice is a posture too. Later that week, an envelope arrived by courier with no sender listed. Inside, a check made out to the museum for a modest sum, and a note that said in a severe hand, "For the purpose of repair." I did not need a signature to understand who had written it. Some people never say sorry. They send money to stand in the sentence's place. Sometimes it is the only language they have learned. I sent the check to the development office with a 1-line cover note, "Anonymous gift designated as requested." I did not add a smiley face, though the temptation amused me on a human level. I closed the file, then opened a new plan where clients had asked for a procession of lanterns along a riverside. The list read: permits, wind map, fire marshal, wet blankets, sand buckets, spare wicks, extra light. You build safety into beauty. That is the work. At home that night, I opened the windows to warm air and street noise. I wrote a single sentence in a notebook I keep for the parts of myself that still require evidence. It read, "A room can tell the truth if you let it." I slept without dreams. Summer arrived with the smell of tomatoes and cut grass. The calendar was full, a graduation on a hilltop with flags from every country the students had lived in. A reunion staged like a play with acts and programs and an intermission for hugs. A birthday for a woman who asked for no gifts, only letters, which we printed on cream paper and strung across the room like prayer flags for a life well lived. On a soft Tuesday, my assistant told me my husband had called the main line and left a message. He had not used my name. He had asked for a meeting about logistics. "Do you want me to forward it?" she asked. "No," I said. "Delete it." She did, the way you drop a stone into water and watch the circles vanish. He did not call again. The absence felt like a decision finally honored. That afternoon, we loaded a truck for an outdoor ceremony by a lake. Weather had threatened to play villain. Clouds gathered, then thought better of it. The couple had written vows that were funny without cruelty and tender without exhibition. When they reached the part about stewardship, a wind moved through the trees as if to co-sign. Guests laughed softly at the timing. The officiant smiled and said the world approves, and everyone clapped, because sometimes joy is not complicated. I walked the perimeter with a radio and a list. Check sound, check shade for elders, check water stations refilled, check the path to parking lit for late departures. I have learned to love the view from the edges. That is where you see whether the center is holding. Near sunset, a vendor asked if I wanted to keep 3 extra chairs we had brought as insurance. Always, I said, and we placed them at the back in a row, like a quiet sentence that reads, "You belong." When the moon rose, paper lanterns bobbed over the lake like tame stars. Children chased each other between the tables. The band found a groove that let conversation ride on top without strain. I stood with a cup of tea and felt time itself slow to a human pace. My phone vibrated with a number I did not recognize, then stilled. No message, no second try. I put it face down and returned to the clipboard. Work saves people like me. It gives the heart a metronome. We ended on schedule without feeling rushed, that delicate trick. Guests departed in clusters, carrying leftovers wrapped in foil, and promises to call that sounded, for once, like they might be kept. The couple waved, then disappeared into a borrowed convertible, decorated with ribbon and restraint. Late, after loadout, my team and I sat on the back of the truck and shared sandwiches meant for staff. We watched the lake breathe. Someone told a story about a rehearsal dinner where the power failed and the cake was cut by flashlight, and somehow it had been perfect. We laughed with our chins tipped up to the stars. The future did not feel like a test. It felt like a field. On the drive home, the radio found a song I had loved in my early 20s. I sang along, not well, not loudly, with that private abandon that comes when the night is kind. At a red light, I realized I had not thought of Rome once that day. Healing can be loud. It can also be this quiet. At home, I opened my laptop and wrote notes for the next morning. A list keeps faith with tomorrow. On the last line, I added the reminder I now write as habit. Extra chairs at the back. It is a small design, a kindness disguised as furniture. It is also an oath. I turned off the lamp. The room looked back at me the way rooms do when they are pleased with how you arranged them. I slept the sleep of a person who knows exactly which house she is in, and exactly where she will sit when the sun comes in. There is a chair in my office that does not match the rest. It is plain and sturdy, with a small nick on one leg where a mover misjudged a turn. I keep it on purpose. When clients arrive telling stories that hide knives inside compliments, I look at that chair and remember the night a missing seat taught me exactly who I was. I learned to plan for joy without permitting spectacle to become cruelty. I learned that documentation is not distrust, it is care for everyone who touches the work. I learned that dignity is a daily verb. You choose it when you answer a message, when you write a clause, when you set a table for someone who has not been counted lately. Sometimes I think of Rome, not the faces, not the script, not the caviar turning warm. I think of walking back across the street with a steady pulse and a plan built from my own hands. The world did not end. It rearranged. I did not shatter, I clarified. Clients still ask for impossible things. I still say yes where love lives and no where harm hides. We still lay cable in the rain, adjust lights by feel, and pass plates down long arms so dessert arrives like a small miracle exactly when a room is ready to receive it. After the last guest leaves, we sweep glitter no one will miss, and fold linen that will live another night. This is the honest magic. Not the toast, not the dress, not the photo, but the dozens of quiet decisions that turn a crowd into a community for a few bright hours. On the anniversary of that dinner, I wrote a letter to the woman I was before the chair went missing. I told her this: "You are not difficult for wanting fairness. You are not fragile for wanting respect. You are not ungrateful for wanting more than access. The door you think is closing is a threshold. Step. When a team member asks why we place 3 extra chairs at the back of every ceremony, I say it is for late arrivals and lost travelers. For the friend who almost did not come, and the cousin who was told there was no room. I say it is a design choice. Really, it is a promise. No one will be erased on my watch. Work ends. Lights dim. Keys turn in locks. I take the long way home. On quiet sidewalks, I pass windows where people eat at small tables and laugh at ordinary jokes. I do not need grand conclusions. I need this: the sound of a city breathing, the proof that lives can be rearranged without permission from anybody else. At my door, I pause and look back down the hall, as if checking a room one last time. Everything is where it belongs. The list for mourning waits on my desk. The chair is in its corner, a witness and a warning and a welcome all at once. I turn out the light. I sleep without bracing. I wake without dread. I count from 1, and the numbers lead forward. Next week's story opens with another missing thing: a ring, a speech, and a seat that should have been reserved. The villain smiles in public. The hero learns in private. The bill arrives, and so does the truth. If you have ever been told there is no room for you, come closer.